Hi, my name is Trevor, and this is, in my opinion, the most important video in the history of the planet. It brings me immense satisfaction to demonstrate, with all the elegance of self-evidence, that the concept of a monotheistic God is not incompatible with the concepts of biology, of physics, and of the natural sciences, but is rather fundamental to them. How the structures revealed by the natural sciences through the scientific method prove the metaphysical principles of monotheism to be true, and see why all this constitutes such good news. You see, the assumption of the current paradigm is that physical matter emerges from nothing, biological forms emerge from inner physical matter, and at a certain level of complexity, consciousness emerges from biology. There's only three major problems with this. We don't know how matter emerges from nothing, we don't know how life emerges from matter, and we don't know how consciousness emerges from life. Moreover, to consider consciousness only as the product of the laws of nature, only as the product of the laws of computation, is to ignore one of the most self-evident features of consciousness, which is that consciousness is not just the result of the things that have happened to me. My consciousness is also itself a causal force that influences the outcomes of events in the physical material world. I wake up in the morning and I decide what I'm going to have for breakfast, what I am going to wear, how I am going to spend my day, how I am going to treat the people in my life. And these intentions, decisions, and actions have very real, very material consequences for the world which my consciousness inhabits. And so a new paradigm is going to have to show that matter, life, and consciousness all have a common origin, and also be able to account for the causal function of consciousness. And we're going to start from not billions of years ago at the origin of life or the origin of matter, but from right here, right now with consciousness as we find it. Consciousness, as we find it, is a physical mass in space, organized by biological conditioning over time, and emerges as a result of complexity. Nearest to consciousness on the physical side, we have the fundamental particles of quantum mechanics, the quarks, the gluons, and so on, the interactions of which are complex to the point of random, collapsing binary patterns out of a probabilistic cloud, highly subject to change, difficult to predict computationally. Nearest to consciousness on the biological side, we have the fundamental building blocks of life, DNA, little bits of discrete physical information. Just like the activities of subatomic particles, the mutations in DNA that drive evolution forward are complex to the point of random, highly subject to change, and difficult to predict computationally. These are like an alphabet. As we move further away from consciousness in biology, we have cells, which are made out of genes, easier to understand and predict, less random, and more mechanistic. On the physical side, atoms, elements, and molecules, easier to understand, less probabilistic, and more mechanistic. These are like words and sentences. Finally, we have the archaic physical formations like stars and planets, larger, more stable bodies whose classical orbits are less disturbed by quantum probabilities, and which work in concert to form the physical universe. On the biological side, the more archaic organ systems, the central nervous system, and so on, larger, more stable bodies of behavior which are less likely to be disturbed by random mutation, and which work together in concert to form the biological organism. The biological organism and the physical universe are then like the book. By reading or studying these books, the vocabulary and the language that organizes the small bits of discrete information into larger, more coherent bodies of behavior is revealed. These are the laws of nature, the language of the physical world. And if we go far enough back in space and time, then we get to a place where there are no building blocks, no larger coherent bodies, and no rules, but rather an undisturbed field, undivided into blocks, ungoverned by any rules or logic. A place beyond the reach of the furthest star, a place before the beginning of life. A place with no matter, no motion, and therefore no laws of physics. A place where there is no life, no evolution, and therefore no laws of biology. And it's not just physics and biology. The structure and experience of consciousness shares this same structure. Only that structure is not made up of physical stuff, but metaphysical stuff. By metaphysical, I don't mean anything spooky or new age. I simply mean something that is immaterial, cannot be perceived by the five senses. Not things like atoms or organs or planets or a mountain or a fish, but things like ideas, images, dreams, drives, mechanisms, intentions, feelings, experiences, motivations, and meanings. Metaphysical, in the original sense of the word, means prior to and transcending the physical. Metaphysical stuff is what organizes physical stuff and puts it into motion. Let's take a look at a very simple example of a habit. For example, riding a bike. When you first learned how to ride a bike, the learning process was on the center stage of your consciousness. I had to learn the individual components of riding a bike, how to balance, how to steer, how to pedal, how to brake, how to go uphill, how to go downhill. To ride a bike, you need to do all of this simultaneously. And before I know how to organize all of this, you're being bombarded with all sorts of different streams of information that all demand my attention simultaneously. But as I continue to practice, the operation becomes smoother. All the individual components begin to work in concert. Lots of streams of information are quickly abstracted into workable chunks so that all of the incoming information is more quickly paired with outgoing reactions. Over time, what began as a conscious, very messy, very dirty process with a lot of friction becomes a smooth, unconscious skill that I have and can embody. We even say of something that we really have down, I could do it in my sleep. And that's how deeply unconscious a habit has become. You don't need to even be awake and alert. You don't even need to be conscious to perform the command riding a bike. Now, when we extrapolate this to the acquisition of habits and patterns of behavior in general, and we grant that the habits and patterns of behavior that were established early on in the so-called formative stages of our life, our parents, how we grew up, and so on, are the habits and patterns most embodied, most stable, most fundamental to our character, and the least likely to be disturbed by new incoming information, just like organs in a body or stars and planets in the solar system, then we're going to start to get an idea of how Freud and Jung conceptualized the immaterial hierarchical structure of the psyche, which governs the information interchange between the consciousness and the world. But there's a big confusion over our common use of the word consciousness. When we use this word consciousness, we typically use it in its most recent etymological sense, which is the state of being awake and alert. Consciousness is a thing that turns on when you wake up in the morning, and the thing that turns off when you go to sleep or get put out by anesthesia or die. When you are awake and alert, functioning as the observer embedded in time-space, every moment is another logical step forward in the chain of events that make up your life. Everything that exists and everything that happens is governed by the logical precedence of events past. But this common conception of consciousness, which I'm going to call consciousness with a small c, is really just the tip of the iceberg. Because when you lay down at night and begin to drift off, the rules of experience begin to change. If I fall asleep and have a dream, I might be able to fly. I can be somewhere without ever having gotten there. A person who I'm talking to might suddenly morph into someone or something else, and so on. While there is still a self, objects, persons, events, and maybe even some cognitive reflection, there is a greater latitude of possibility in dreams than there is during ordinary waking life. And going still deeper into sleep, the cognitive reflection begins to fade. The self begins to slip away. Distinction between object and subject collapses. Even objects and events themselves slip away and are replaced by less definite, less linear, more tonal, more abstract phenomena. Going deeper even than that, even experience and phenomena begin to fade away. In a state of deep, unconscious sleep, there are no things, there is no self, there is no phenomena, there is no experience. And to follow the logic here, this lack of phenomena, this no-thingness, with no one there to experience, is also total possibility. In our objective waking lives, we all have unique bodies, unique minds, unique experiences, and unique dreams. But in deep sleep, where there is no body, where there is no mind, where there is no experience, no dreaming, it is the same for all of us. Deepest within our subjective experience, exactly where we would expect to find the most subjective experience, we find instead the one and only absolutely objective state of consciousness, where everyone experiences the same thing always. Nothing. Literally a lack of conscious experience. The fact that you were unconscious is an inference which can only be established when you wake up. And even if you could experience it, it has no phenomenal content. So there wouldn't be anything you could say about it anyway. But what the Buddha and other mystical traditions have pointed out is that we can learn to enter the state of nothingness, the state of deep sleep, with the light of consciousness still on, by ascending Jacob's ladder from an awake and alert consciousness, rather than descending into the underworld of sleep and dreams. It's tricky, though, because the very function of consciousness, as we can see when we go from deep sleep into consciousness, is to organize this potential into definite actuality. But if we can overcome all the inertia and stop organizing reality, stop doing things, stop acting, stop thinking, stop projecting, stop rationalizing, stop even feeling this way or that way about this thing or that thing, then the organization of reality actually begins to dissolve before your eyes. And gradually you will see for yourself that the substance that makes up your unique subjective experience of the world is the objective, empty, and boundless field of possibility. And it is not the silence of the void. It is the energetic hum, the om of possibility. And what organizes this potential into actuality and makes a world out of it is the causal function of consciousness. Now I'm going to show you the Minkowski model of four-dimensional spacetime with the metaphysical principles restored to their rightful foundation, where the lower triangle represents the objective material world, which is on the outside, or the object of consciousness. And the upper triangle represents the immaterial, subjective, metaphysical structure of consciousness, which is the organization of potential. The lower represents the actuality of the world, and the upper, the potentiality of the world. The upper is subjective and internal to the participant in time-space, and the lower is objective and external to the participant. It is the respiration between the two that gives the motion to masses of physical information that we call time. And this structure, this process, which always presents as a seamless, unified whole, is what we call God, or consciousness with a big C, or being. Which, to bring it back to the book metaphor, and bring this all into definition, is simultaneously all three: the author, the living document that is phenomenal reality, and the circular or recursive loop between reading and writing. And this is not newly discovered, newly uncovered knowledge. The structure Einstein is describing with four-dimensional spacetime is the exact structure that Michelangelo was describing when he painted the centerpiece of the Sistine Chapel, perhaps the central painting of the entire Western tradition, where he represents on the right the internal, the metaphysical, the generative, And on the left, the external, the physical, and the receptive, the Father and the Son. And the fruit of this communion is the creation of Adam, or atom, the fundamental building block of reality, the thing. But what is a thing? Well, it's like this. Imagine a tomato. You can see the red color. You can feel the fuzzy stem. You can feel the firmness of the fruit in your hand. You can slice it up, add some salt, watch the salt dissolve, and eat it. You can imagine a brown tomato or a green tomato and feel how the firmness of the tomato corresponds to the color of the tomato. You can imagine throwing a tomato against a wall and having it splatter. Then you can pick up the seeds of that tomato, plant them in your garden, and watch them grow into their own tomato plants. Or imagine a person. Imagine my friend Bob. I can imagine what he looks like. I can imagine how Bob dresses. I can imagine how Bob talks. I can imagine how he would act if he were sad or happy or angry or mopey. I can even imagine what he might think about certain things or what he would say about certain things. But where is this tomato? Where is this Bob that I am imagining in my mind? They are invisible things, which are no doubt existing, but not as physical objects in space-time. I can't give it to you. You can't see these things with your physical eyes or touch them with your hands. They exist within my own private, subjective experience. What I am experiencing when I think of a tomato or my friend Bob is an imaginary recreation or a simulation of Bob within my own mind. It is a metaphysical thing. So I collect all of these bits of physical information that I have observed in space-time. And then I throw a lasso around them and say that the causal force which produces this set of physical attributes is the tomato, or is my friend Bob. That causal force is the image I see or feel when I close my eyes and I imagine a tomato or my friend Bob. And when I encounter in daily life, in the here and now of time-space, the physical Bob in a room or a tomato in my garden, I am encountering the physical symbol that represents the causal force behind it. It is like the logo for the causal force that I encounter. And the act of attaching, hypothetically, a causal force, a spirit, a character, a mechanism to a set of physical phenomena is the process of rationality. Rationality is what makes a thing a thing. It lets me say, oh yes, this is this, and that is that. It is what populates the world with physical symbols, people, persons, places, things, and so on. And as I interact with the thing, I am observing new information that must be incorporated into my idea of it, and I improve my representation of that thing. And as I am interacting with the thing, I am entering into a relationship with it. And that relationship affects the future potential of that thing. In fact, anything in space-time is really the conjunction between a thing's physical structure, its actuality, and its potential from the beginning of time to the end. And as I form a relationship with a thing, the potential of that thing is revealed or actualized, made real in physical reality. How that potential becomes actualized is determined by the nature of the relationship. Truth is not the state of a thing or a system, because A, the state of a thing is always subjective, dependent on the state and location of the observer. And B, the state of a system is always in flux. So as soon as I have described the state of a system, that state has already passed. It is rather the relationship that manifests the best outcome, not for one party or another, but for all parties across all of time. That is truth. That is love. That is the Christ, the fundamental attracting force of creation. So the world of people, places, and things is made up of physical symbols. Those physical symbols have words for them, They have names. And we use those words or those names to conduct a conversation. And what you'll notice is that there really is no other party in a conversation, but rather we are tossing information and ideas back and forth between two aspects, unconscious and conscious, of our own personal experience. When I hear someone talking to me, what is really going on? There's this continuous buzzing wave of sound hitting my eardrum. That sound wave is then organized, rationalized, or rationalized, broken down into discrete bits of information, words and sentences. Those words and sentences work together to reproduce, in my own mind, the meaning or the image that my friend was trying to convey. I am thinking again. I am recognizing, seeing the mental image my friend had in his own mind. We are attaching a causal force to the words and sentences. And that causal force is the meaning that my friend is attempting to convey. That's why we say, I see what you mean. The thing that we are seeing is the internal, immaterial, metaphysical meaning. And this is actually the oldest etymological meaning of the word consciousness, meaning knowledge shared together. And when I say something back to my friend in turn, I start with the meaning or the image in my own mind. That meaning is then organized or rationalized into discrete bits, words, and sentences. Those words, those discrete bits of information, are again made in the image of the meaning that organized them. My friend hears those words, recognizes the meaning that produced them, and says, I know what you have in mind. Most of the time, in interchange like this, the respiration between metaphysical meaning and physical information happens so smoothly, so unconsciously, so automatically that we hardly notice it is happening. But sometimes there are hiccups. Like when you find yourself at a loss for a particular word, you say, oh, what is that word? Or what is the name of that person? I have it on the tip of my tongue. It is at that moment you can notice that there is an abstract, immaterial meaning or idea that is seeking expression. It is the very nature of ideas and meanings that they are seeking expression in the world of physical actuality. Ideas and meanings and dreams and desires seek to organize physical stuff in its image. That is why they are causal forces. The physical expression is like the footprint of the causal force that created it. This experience that we have when we have it on the tip of our tongue is like a microcosm of creative activity generally. A creative product, like a book, begins with an idea or a meaning or an image, a very dense, tonal, feeling kind of thing. And to bring that immaterial meaning into physical representation, I sit down to work. That requires making a lot of decisions. I make very high-level, abstract decisions, like form, like shape, like tone, like length. And I make very small, discrete decisions, like the choice of phrase, the choice of words, and so on. I have to make decisions that range all the way from the archetypal axioms of the project down to the very discrete building blocks. And I'm not just representing the idea that began the project. I am entering into a relationship with it. In the process of expressing the idea or attempting to express the idea, I am coming to a greater understanding of what exactly it is that I am trying to express. And when I've finished, I've got this physical book filled with all these words and sentences. I've got this big mass of physical information made up of little discrete bits that all together form the image of the original idea, like the tiny discrete pixels on a digital monitor that work together to form the image that is on the larger screen. This is the act of creation, which is dramatized over and over again in symbolic and metaphysical texts, like in the Lord's Prayer. This is what it means to bring an immaterial, abstract idea into physical actuality, to bring the things of heaven down to earth, using the physical materials at hand, so as to make it below as it is above. And the best book would be the book that best expresses the idea that it is attempting to represent. And so I've brought this highly dense, abstract, metaphysical thing into actual physical representation. I've written a book. And now somebody else can pick up my book and pass their eyes over all of these words, all of these little bits of information. And by entering into a relationship with the book, the causal force, the original idea, or the organizational energy that created it is recreated in the mind of the reader. That organizational spirit of the book is revealed. And that organizational spirit is the mind of the author. Think of the spirit or the organizational energy or the mind like a pair of metaphysical glasses. When I have recreated the organizational spirit of the book in my mind, I can go out and I can try it on like a pair of glasses. I can go outside, go for a walk, and observe how that metaphysical pair of glasses organizes and transforms the incoming sensory information. And so a perceptive person could pick up my book, read it, study it, enter into a relationship with it, and recreate or rediscover for themselves the organizational spirit which gave rise to it. They can simulate and begin to understand the mind that created it. They can use it to organize novel information. And if they collect enough novel information with that framework, they could even use it to produce their own book. And because that new book was produced with the same organizational spirit as the first, we say that those two books are of kindred spirit. And someone can read those two books and produce a third. And someone can read all those books and produce a fourth book and a fifth book. Until eventually we have built up an entire body, an entire corpus of many different works, which are produced by the same organizational spirit through many different individuals. They are one body of many different works, all produced by the same disembodied spirit. And that is the very idea behind a canon of scripture like the Bible. The idea behind the Bible is that all the books within it, written across vast swaths of time, across huge expanses of circumstance, even different languages, ranging in form from mythology to prophecy to history to letters to law, have been produced by the same Spirit, specifically the Holy Spirit. And together they form the Word or the Logos or the logic or the language of God. And by entering into a relationship with the book, the language, the mode of thinking, the organizational spirit behind them is revealed. And we can begin to understand the mind that produced those works. And the claim is that the organizational spirit, or the mind we get to know through the Bible, is the organizational spirit that creates and has created the entire world and everything in it. And that all of creation, all the physical world, the animals, the mountains, the oceans, and the stars and the moon, are all evidence of that same causal force, that same mind. The physical world is the Son of God, made by and forming the image of God's mind. The physical world is like the living body of God, which is orchestrated by the invisible mind of God. And it follows that if we get to know the language, the logic that organizes physical stuff, if we get to know the laws of nature, then too will the mind of nature, the mind of time, the mind that creates and has created all things, be revealed. The founding fathers of science knew this. They stated it explicitly in their works. This idea came to be known as the two books heresy. They said God has written two books by which we can get to know him. One is the book of Scripture, the Bible, and the second is the book of the physical world, the book of nature. And by entering into a relationship with those books, the mind of God is revealed. Science and Scripture are not mutually exclusive frameworks. They are complementary methods of obtaining divine knowledge. Two books whose study reveals a common design behind all things, visible and invisible, physical and spiritual. and the rightful restoration of metaphysical insight and the mystical states that produce them to the foundation of the natural sciences opens up a whole new line of inquiry in this great investigation. And if what I am saying is true, that this is all the great creation, the great design of an omnipotent intelligence that has seen all things, that can do anything, then what is the will of that God? What is it that God wants? What is God trying to do with creation? If you had seen all things, if you knew the meaning behind all things and you could do anything, what would you want? The best. Not the best for this thing or for that thing, but the best for everything and everyone. And if God can do anything, then by definition, God will get what he wants. And therefore, no matter what you do, no matter how hard you work against it, no matter what you believe, the inevitable destination of all creation is a world that works for everyone with nothing left out. That is God's plan. And that is the view from eternity. And you say, wow. And then you wake up the next morning in this little wormhole perspective of history, and everything is just fucked. This is a problem, and that's a problem. Everywhere I look is just problems and problems and problems, and everything is just fucked. And then you see just how much your problems care if you know all the esoteric secrets of the universe. See how much it helps to be able to have seen where all things come from, what all things are, and where all things are going. See just how much those problems care about your stupid fucking mystical experience. They'll still be there. The answer we are looking for is not a way out. It's not by extinguishing the ego or hiding away in the cave or having some great vision. The answer we are looking for is a path deeper into the woods of life. The solution to our problems is to do what we already know is best, which is to make the world a better place for those who will inherit it from us. The solution that delivers us from the problems of the world is the commitment to making it a better place. I am now making it your personal responsibility to understand the bottomless profundity and the stupefying simplicity of what it has cost me no small expense to be able to share with you. That the foundation of Western civilization is the belief in Jesus Christ. And to believe in Jesus Christ is to make a personal commitment to making the world a better place. That's it. That's all. That's the water. And the way that you are going to make the world a better place is not by being able to explain it or by saying it like some sort of a magical spell or something. The way that you are going to make the world a better place is by betting your life on it and becoming a vital part of the world in a way that only you can. You are unique down to your fingerprints. Unique down to the hairs on your head. Unique down to the blood in your veins. Unique down to the way that you walk, in the way that you think, in the way that you talk. All of it. In all of time, in all of history, from the beginning to the end, there has never been, and there will never be, another you. There will never be another now. Let me state this emphatically. No one has it figured out. No one has the theory. No institution has the keys. The whole idea of enlightenment could not be a bigger crock of shit. Because the very act of life, the very act of history, the very act of existence is the finding out for your own self by putting it all on the line. And I didn't say it was going to be easy, because the truth is not it's going to be easy. The truth is, it's worth it. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share this with you. Thank you.